When we speak of sex, we're not merely referring to a physical act. We are addressing a deeply embedded psychological force, one that operates beneath the surface of our conscious minds. The influence of sex on human motivation begins in the brain, and the story it tells is not just biological but philosophical. You see, when an individual engages in sexual activity, or even contemplates it, the brain responds by flooding itself with a cocktail of neurochemicals. Chief among them is dopamine, the molecule of desire, the neurotransmitter that governs reward and motivation. But dopamine is not a neutral agent. It doesn't simply reward us for pleasurable acts. It programs us. It wires us to repeat whatever gave us that initial rush. In the context of sex, this means that desire becomes less about connection or meaning and more about the pursuit of the stimulus itself. The more we chase it, the more we become entangled in a feedback loop of anticipation and gratification. Jung might say this is where libido transforms from a vital life force into a shadow, something that begins to possess us rather than serve us. Add to this the role of oxytocin and vasopressin. You begin to see how sex influences not just how we feel, but how we belong. These chemicals shape our emotional associations, binding us to people and experiences that may or may not serve our well-being. You may find yourself drawn irresistibly to someone who is objectively destructive to your life, yet neurologically coded into your psyche as a source of significance. Why prefer? Because the emotional intensity tied to sexual connection carves deep grooves in the mind, creating meaning, even when that meaning is based on illusion. And therein lies the great paradox. Sex is both sacred and manipulative, healing and compulsive. It is a drive that, if not consciously understood, begins to direct our thoughts, our relationships, even our sense of self. In a world that commercializes sexual imagery at every turn, this neurological mechanism is constantly being hijacked. You are not always the one behind the wheel of your own desire. Often it's the chemical puppeteer in your brain pulling the strings, and society is all too willing to hand it the script. What emerges then is a philosophical dilemma. Are we free to desire what we choose, or are we merely responding to the ancient rhythms of a mind wired for survival, not wisdom? The challenge is not to repress the sexual instinct, but to integrate it, to understand its place within the architecture of the psyche and to choose consciously how we let it shape our lives. Because if we do not bring awareness to what controls us, then we are not in control. Sex may be a biological imperative, but meaning, true, enduring meaning, can only emerge through consciousness. And so the question each of us must ask is not simply what we want, but why we want it. If we are to understand how sex controls the mind, we must look beyond the individual experience and into the architecture of human evolution. Sexual desire did not arise in a vacuum. It is not arbitrary, nor is it merely personal. It is, in fact, one of the most ancient motivational systems embedded in our psyche, an instinct forged over millennia to ensure the survival of our species. In this sense, it is less about pleasure and more about programming. The human brain, in its deepest layers, is not designed for happiness. It is designed for continuation of self, of genes, of lineage, and sex, biologically speaking, is the primary vehicle for that continuation. This drive is not moral or immoral, it simply is. And because it operates largely outside of conscious awareness, it can often override our rationality, our values, and even our sense of self. This is where we begin to see the shadow side of sexuality, not in the act itself, but in its capacity to bend human behavior toward goals that may not align with our higher nature. From an evolutionary perspective, the mind has been shaped to prioritize sexual opportunity, even at the expense of logic. This is why intelligent, capable individuals can find themselves engaging in compulsive behaviors, chasing unavailable partners, or making self-destructive choices they later regret. It's not that they lack insight, it's that the biological imperative momentarily eclipses it. Jung might suggest that this is libido misdirected, channeled not through the self, but through the archetypal forces of desire, domination, and fantasy. We must also recognize that this ancient drive is not just physical, it is symbolic. Sexual energy in many psychological traditions represents the life force itself. It is the raw vitality out of which creativity, ambition, and transformation emerge. When repressed, it becomes neurotic. When indulged without awareness, it becomes addictive. But when integrated, it becomes a source of power, one that can be used to build, to connect, to evolve. The tragedy lies in our forgetting. We forget that our urges are not always our own in the way we assume. They are inherited, embedded, and automated. And unless we bring them into the light of consciousness, they control us from within. We are pushed and pulled not by will, but by instinct masquerading as choice. To reclaim agency over our minds, we must be willing to ask, what part of me is choosing? Is it the conscious self grounded in values and vision, or is it the ancient self ruled by impulses that once ensured survival but now often sabotage fulfillment? Sex, then, is not a problem to solve, but a force to understand. It can imprison the mind or awaken it, depending on whether we choose to live from instinct or insight. And in that choice lies the difference between being driven and being truly alive. When we consider how sex controls the mind, we cannot ignore the immense influence of culture and media in shaping our desires and perceptions. Sexuality, far from being a purely private or natural phenomenon, is deeply entwined with the narratives and images we consume every day. These external forces mold not just what we want, but how we want it, and who we believe we must become to attain it. The psyche, as Jung taught us, is not isolated. It is porous, absorbing and reflecting the collective unconscious as well as the conscious culture surrounding it. Sexuality, therefore, is as much a social construction as it is a biological impulse. Through endless repetition in movies, advertisements, music, and social media, sex is portrayed as the ultimate symbol of power, success, and self-worth. This bombardment conditions the mind to associate sexual attractiveness with identity and validation, subtly yet profoundly manipulating our motivations. What begins as a natural urge gradually becomes entangled with the need to meet these external ideals. The mind is trained to chase not simply intimacy or connection, but approval and status, commodities that are intangible and fleeting. This creates a paradox where sex is both desired and feared, a source of liberation, yet also a cage. From a psychological perspective, this cultural programming taps into our deepest vulnerabilities, the yearning to belong, to be seen, to be worthy. When the media presents a narrow and often unrealistic image of sexuality, it stokes insecurities and dissatisfaction. People begin to internalize the idea that their natural desires or bodies are insufficient, leading to a fractured sense of self. The mind becomes a battlefield where genuine longing fights against imposed ideals. The philosophical dimension here is profound. We are faced with the challenge of discerning the authentic self from the self shaped by collective illusions. Sexual desire, once a pure expression of life energy, becomes entangled with masks and fantasies crafted by society. The question then is not whether we will feel desire, but whether we will allow shame to define us or courage to free us. To speak of sex controlling the mind is to acknowledge a profound tension between instinct and consciousness, a tension that defines the human condition itself. But it is here, in this very conflict, that the possibility of freedom emerges. The power to reclaim control over the mind lies not in denial or repression, but in awareness, discipline, and integration. When we awaken to the forces that drive us, we step out of unconscious slavery and into conscious sovereignty. The first step toward this sovereignty is awareness. Sexual desire, like any primal force, thrives in the shadows of ignorance. It commands our attention when least expected, steering us toward actions and decisions that may not serve our higher aims. But when we bring this energy into the light of consciousness, it loses its tyrannical grip. Mindfulness, an honest observation of our thoughts, feelings, and impulses, allows us to discern between desire born of authentic need and desire manipulated by external pressures or inner compulsion. Discipline follows awareness. This is not discipline in the sense of rigid denial or asceticism, but a measured choice to direct energy rather than be directed by it. The mind, when disciplined, becomes a vessel for intentional action rather than reactive habit. Just as a skilled artist shapes raw clay, so too can we shape our sexual energy, channeling it into creativity, connection, and growth rather than fragmentation and loss. Integration is the deepest level of mastery. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming whole by embracing all aspects of the self, including the shadow. To integrate sexuality into the psyche means to recognize it not as a disruptive force, but as a vital source of life and meaning. It requires courage to face the fears, shame, and illusions that surround sex and to hold them in balance with our higher values and aspirations. This integration transforms sexual energy from a source of chaos into a source of power. It no longer controls us because it is no longer hidden or denied. It becomes a conscious ally in the pursuit of a fulfilled life. The mind that once was captive to fleeting desires now harnesses them for lasting purpose. Philosophically, this journey reflects the essence of human freedom, the ability to choose, to act not from blind impulse but from conscious intent. Sex, then, is neither enemy nor master. It is a force to be known, respected, and integrated. To live in such awareness is to reclaim a fundamental part of our humanity. It is to break the cycle of unconscious control and step into the fullness of our being. The question is no longer how sex controls your mind, but how your mind can master sex, transforming desire into wisdom and impulse into freedom.